Hey everyone, so welcome back. I'm Yogi Doug Johnson, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about pain versus suffering. Okay, so pain versus suffering. This is today's topic. Before I discuss the topic today, I do want to thank my patrons on Patreon. And if you're watching this on YouTube where there's no charge, then it is these patrons on Patreon who contribute and make this possible for me to do this work. So I want to give a heartfelt thank you to them, and they essentially collaborate with me to make this possible. So without their support, I would not be able to do this on YouTube. So thank you. Okay, today's topic, pain versus suffering. Let's base this on the Sanskrit word dukkha. And dukkha is a word that's found in both the yogic scriptures, like the Upanishads, scriptures that have given birth to the yogic tradition and are cited in the yogic tradition. Now, in a lot of religion, that would be called Hinduism today. But yoga and Hinduism are really two separate things, even though they share a lot of the same foundation, you might say, spiritual foundation. So Hinduism is really a religion. Yoga is not really a religion. Buddhism, it can be both. It can be, some people can practice it essentially as a religion, and then other people can approach Buddhism as more of a almost yogic tradition, what I would call a yogic tradition. And this is really true of every tradition. So there are what I would call essentially Christian yogis. They would never call themselves yogis. They would call themselves, maybe hermits or monks or nuns or the Desert Fathers or something along these lines. But essentially, in my mind, these are what I call yogis. This is the word I use for yogis. So there are Taoist yogis, there are Christian yogis, there are Hindu yogis, there are, all these other things. Now, the type of yoga that I teach is based on primarily three traditions of yoga, the way that I look at it. The primary foundation for me is the Indian tradition of yoga. I think, in my opinion, from what I've studied and seen, this is the most complete overview, which is why I use that as my foundation. So the Vedic culture, the Brahmanic culture, very rich tradition of spirituality for thousands of years. It developed a very advanced sophisticated way of looking at spirituality and dealing with spirituality. This, in my mind, is separate and different from what we would today call Hinduism, which again is essentially religion. And I draw a lot from the Buddhist tradition as well, which again, it can be I'm not Buddhist. I don't consider myself Buddhist, and I'm also not trying to teach you to be Buddhist. I'm not really interested in you. If you follow a religion or not, that's really your business. And what I teach hopefully can integrate with any religion that you practice. So religion is sort of a belief system, a system of myths. It can be helpful for some people and very harmful for other people. So it really, again, just depends on our perspective and our relationship with our religion. Some people, again, have a very sophisticated view of their religion. And by sophisticated, I don't necessarily mean complex. I just mean sophisticated. And then other people can have a very crude understanding of their religion and their beliefs, and it can create a lot of guilt and shame. And these things, in my view, they're just really useless emotions. They're not really helpful. So, if your religion is causing you to have a lot of guilt and shame and feel really deficient, then if you're a student of mine, I would encourage you to start to examine that. Examine your relationship with your religion. Doesn't mean you need to give it up, but it may mean you need to reinterpret the scriptures or the teachings that you grew up with, because they may not actually be helping you. And why adopt something in life that isn't actually helping you? And just remember, there are always multiple ways of interpreting scripture and religion and belief. So we aren't necessarily stuck with one narrow interpretation, right? So Taoism is another stream that feeds very strongly into my teaching. And then also the teachings of Christ, the way that I interpret and see them. I'm, again, not a Christian, and I'm not trying to teach you to be a Christian. And again, there's no problem if you are. But it really is that figure, Jesus, and the way that he taught. I think he was a very powerful, clear teacher. And in my opinion, especially for Westerners, I think his teaching, when it's understood the way that I understand it, and again, not saying my interpretation is the right one or the only one, but what I get from reading what he said and his life and the way he acted, for me, he was a very powerful teacher, very clear, and it can be very helpful for a lot of people who grow up in the West, especially because in the West, and we essentially grow up with a sort of Christian framework, whether we realize it or not. Even if we're Jewish, even if we are Buddhist, even if we're Hindu, even if we're Muslim, if you grew up in the West, then there's a certain amount of sort of Christian thought. And when I say Christian, I don't mean Jesus's thought. I do mean the religion. There are sort of conventions that can come in. So a lot of us grow up with certain conventions that I actually think are misunderstandings, misinterpretations of what Jesus was trying to teach. So for me, seeing what was really important in his teaching and emphasizing that, I think, can be very helpful. So dukkha, this word dukkha, is it's used in Buddhism, it's used in Hinduism, and it can be translated as unsatisfactoriness, suffering, even pain, stress. These are all words that we can use to describe this word dukkha. And the one that's most commonly used, especially in Buddhist circles, is suffering. So there's a famous teaching that Buddha gave, all life is suffering, and a lot of people, they sort of end their exploration of Buddhist thought there. Many people find that as sort of turn off to Buddhism. They think, well, that doesn't sound appealing to me. I don't want to study a teaching, a philosophy, a religion that is basically espousing that all life is suffering. But I would encourage those people to again look at the other definitions or the other possible interpretations of that word, dukkha, suffering, unsatisfactoriness. So it could have been that in Buddha's day, where there were likely people who were struggling to stay alive, who were living in abject poverty, people who, if they had a drought or a dry season, they were farmers, they might actually starve to death. If there was a fire or an earthquake or something like that, natural disaster, there was no FEMA, there was no national government who was going to sweep in and take care of them. That word may have resonated, that definition may have resonated more with ancient peoples. If you're listening to this talk, chances are you have access to the internet, you have access to probably smart devices and a computer at least. So chances are you're living at least probably at a certain level of human existence where that word suffering may not resonate with you about your experience. You just may feel like, wow, life is really stressful. Not suffering, but life is really stressful. Or, yeah, I don't get my way. I wish I would get my way more often, but, I'm not suffering. But, yeah, today my coffee was cold and there was traffic on the way to work and my boss doesn't treat me very well. So I'm not suffering, but, yeah, life sucks, kind of that kind of thing. So this is dukkha. This is still dukkha. So today I wanted to draw a little bit of a distinction between pain, which is in the moment, or explore this idea of pain, and then suffering, which is, in my mind, prolonged. So the first thing I want to sort of get out of the way is I'm not really talking about, I'm not going to start by talking about physical pain. I'm going to talking about psychological pain, okay? So in the last talk I gave, I spoke a little bit about the passing of my father and the sadness that arose. Now, some of you know that I don't even view sadness really as a negative emotion or painful emotion. I think many of us assume that it is because we've been taught from a very young age that it's not okay to be sad. We probably, if we were sad, we saw our parents react in one of a few ways. One is they went into a panic and tried to get us to stop crying, maybe by buying us an ice cream or promising us certain things, or kissing the boo-boo better, whatever it is. Our parents tried to, get us to stop crying and to be happy again, not to be sad, because it broke their heart, right? It was hard for them to hold space for that. Or some parents get actually angered by sadness, a child's sadness, and they, like I said in the last talk, they might say something like, stop crying. If you keep crying, I'm going to give you something to cry about. And again, that was something that was actually said to me. So this is this sort of idea of, stop being such a baby. And again, as a young child, you feel really strong emotions. They sort of take over your whole experience. And as a young human being, you don't know what that means or how to handle that or how to deal with that. And a lot of times the grown-ups around us are not very sympathetic. A third option is your parents may have just completely ignored you. They may have just, shut you in your room or said, get out of here if you're going to cry, whatever it is. And again, I don't want you to see your parents as somehow wrong or bad or evil, or I don't want you to see yourself as the victim of your parents. This is very, very important. I'm just trying to explain kind of how we got where we are. So my view now, after my awakening several decades ago, I experienced a bout of sadness. It was because of a breakup. And it wasn't a dramatic breakup. There wasn't yelling or screaming. It was just a very natural parting of ways. Someone who I had dated for many years and had done a lot of growing with, we basically grew apart. She went overseas and lived overseas for a time, and we tried communicating and staying in touch, but when she came back, it sort of became clear that we weren't really in a relationship anymore. And so we ended up splitting up, and I just had this wave of sadness come over me. And instead of resisting it, as I might have done when I was younger, I just really went into it. I really embraced it. I you could say enjoyed it. I just dove right in with 2 feet and let it wash over me. And it was a very beautiful experience. It's a very sublime emotion. If you've never really allowed yourself to feel sadness, it's very beautiful. So that sadness rose and came up, and from that day on, pretty much, I don't try and push away sadness or even wish it away. I welcome it. If sadness comes, I welcome it. It's a beautiful human emotion to experience sadness. If you look at the animal kingdom, it seems like there's a lot of animals that never experience sadness. Why do we go to watch sad movies? Right? We human beings will pay money to go watch a story arc that makes us cry. Right? Isn't that one of the things that people say about a great movie? Oh my God, I cried. And yet, in our own lives, we want to say, no, I can't cry. It's not good to cry. I shouldn't cry. Crying is bad. Sadness is bad. So, as I said in the last talk, emotions from the Taoist perspective they're neutral. They're not good or bad, or you could say they're healthy if they are flowing and allowed to move. What the triggers I talked about last time, these happen when emotions get stuck. Okay? So again, as long as we are not repressing or pushing down, choking down our emotions, then they can flow. And in my experience, when they flow, this is the color, you might say, of being human and living a human life. We're all going to have victories and losses, unique challenges that are ours to our life. Some people have a lot of challenges. They're born maybe with a disability or some handicap in some way, and that defines their entire life. Many of us are not born with that, but we still have our own challenges. And here's the thing I'd like you to understand is each person's challenges are neither greater or lesser than someone else's challenges. Okay, so I think it's very tempting to say that the suffering of somebody who lost both their legs is greater than the suffering of someone who just had a breakup. But I don't really see it that way. I think that human suffering is human suffering. And somebody who lives in a castle but is suffering is still suffering. Now, it can be true that if we begin to cultivate things like gratitude and a different perspective, we might find that a lot of our suffering disappears, right? If we can say, well, I've got food on the table, I have a roof over my head, my body, all my limbs are intact, all my digits are working, so I've got it pretty good. So I'm going through a breakup, that's sad, but all told, I'm doing pretty well. That's great if we can adopt that perspective and live that truth. But the problem for most of us is when we're suffering, we don't have that ability to step back like that. That's part of the problem. And that's called Velcro. A lot of spiritual teachers call that Velcro. So what is Velcro? Well, when we wake up to our true nature. And many of you have woken up. Some of you are in the process of waking up. Some of you have not yet woken up. But when we truly wake up, there's a spaciousness that comes into our awareness. A spaciousness and a disidentification from the body-mind. Now, when I say disidentification, it doesn't mean the body-mind disappears or goes away, or we don't care what happens to it, or we're not interested in it, okay? What that means is there's just a different experience of being embodied and a different experience of our thoughts and our emotions. Now again, for most people that wake up, this does not happen all at once, and it's not complete. So Velcro is areas where the ego still has a stronghold. It still has a lot of identification, and it's able to pull us out of that more spacious awareness that can step back and again say, well, I have a lot to be grateful for, even though maybe my romantic life is not going the way that I would like. I still have so many things to be grateful for. So I might be sad or upset, but overall I'm living, in peace and joy, and I know that I'll move on from this relationship, right? And again, this isn't denying our emotions. So very, very important. We're not trying to push anything away. We're not trying to gloss over sadness, or if we break up with someone and we are sad, we're not trying to say, well, I have a lot of money, so I'm not going to be sad. This isn't what I'm talking about, okay? Anyway, this stepping back, most of us will have areas where we can do that very easily, but many people, even after a powerful awakening or awakenings, because people can have, again, they wake to a certain area in their life, and then there's another area that sort of they awaken to. So this process that happens, as that happens very often, there will be areas of Velcro where they get sort of back into the egoic identity, the small self, what in Zen Buddhism we call the small self, rather than the big self, okay? So when we get Velcroed, that's when we are suffering, okay? And again, right now, I just want to talk about sort of psychological suffering. So a painful event can happen. Again, let's just take a breakup. And, my heart might actually ache in that instance. I might feel a lot of sensation in my body. And, it may not be my favorite thing. I may not want to feel that way for a prolonged period of time. But my experience since awakening is I don't. If I allow myself to fully feel the sadness, the grief, the anger, the frustration, whatever the negative emotion might be, if I allow myself to feel that completely, it washes over me like a wave. And this is a very important concept to embrace here, which is the concept of flow. So again, in Taoism, this is something that's spoken about a lot. And again, I'm sort of using the Taoist framework here that all the emotions are ultimately healthy if they're allowed to flow. So they arise naturally. In Taoism, they're seen as arising from various organs which have different functions. And so different emotions, the emotions arise, and as long as that energy can flow, then it's fine. What the problem is when there is an imbalance, now this could be in the meridian system, or again, psychological, which are really not separate from one another. In the West, we have this sort of obsession of mind versus body, spirit versus flesh, and really it's a duality that really doesn't exist. When you are awake enough, you see that there really isn't a dualness there. It really is one. So anyway, when we resist certain emotions, when we repress certain emotions, when there are imbalances in the system because of diet, lifestyle, whatever it is, the particular emotion that arises is not able to flow. It gets stuck and it begins to create problems for us. So just like I was talking about last time about emotion, right? An emotion comes up it moves us to do or say something, and then it resolves the situation and then disappears and dissipates. There's no grudge or anything like that. There's just this like a wave. It comes and then it goes. And this is how pain can be. I had a Zen teacher, my first Zen teacher, and he used to say, pain in life is unavoidable, but suffering is optional. And I love that, because in a very real sense, I think that that's true. So we could say emotion in life is unavoidable, both what we call good and bad emotions. The question we want to ask is, am I stuck in an emotion? So for instance, I have people in my family who are angry all the time. It just does not take much for them to get angry and start yelling and screaming, and it's not helping a situation. They're just sort of throwing this energy. And again, this is sort of a sign that there's some kind of imbalance going on inside of them, that there's something not right, because they're getting angry at situations where the anger isn't helping the situation. It's not resolving the situation. It's not making it easier for anybody. The example I gave last time was an example that actually surprised me again, where I had anger come up and actually helped to resolve a situation. I was quite surprised by it, but it began to change my thinking on anger. So pain, like emotion, we could say is something that happens spontaneously, and then it disappears when a situation has sort of resolved itself or gone away. Suffering is something that lingers. It doesn't really go away. It may become less or more, but it's just sort of there. So things like worry, I think that's a good one for a lot of modern people. I'm worried. I'm worried about the environment. I'm worried about the government. I'm worried about my children. I'm worried about coronavirus. I'm worried about vaccines. I'm worried about masks. I'm worried about you name it. Okay? Anxiety is another one. Oh, I can't sleep at night. I just feel anxious. I feel like something's not right. Depression is another one. So I'm trying to use words that hopefully you can understand. These are situations that are just lingering on and on and on. Okay, this is different than what I'm talking about in a situation, right? A particular situation that arises and is acute, right? It's a situation, a response comes up, pain or discomfort, an emotion. It comes up, the situation then is resolved, and that energy is free to dissipate, and it does dissipate. This is in contrast to, well, I'm just always worried. Another one, again, dukkha, one of the translations of the word is stress. And this is an interesting one because many modern people have so gotten used to the level of stress that modern life is that if you ask them, they may not actually report being stressed out. But if we were to take some vitals and look at their health, we might find the signs of stress on them. So I think some of you have heard me say before that animals raised in captivity generally show signs of having higher level of stress. They also don't tend to live as long. Now, some people don't like me saying it this way, but essentially if you live in a modern industrialized culture, even if you live in an agricultural society, like many of the cultures that modern societies are built on, you probably are you basically live in captivity, and you're probably dealing with some level of stress because your life is not really the optimal one for this human makeup. You're not living in the optimal way that your body and mind were designed to live. Now that's, from my perspective, that's fine. Part of what we want to do with these tools is, in essence, adapt the psyche and adapt the psyche to the modern landscape. And that's what I think these tools can do for us, is we can learn to adapt to modern life so that we can live free of stress and these types of things. But stress is another one, and many people, again, just live with so much stress they don't even realize it. So when people come first to yoga and spirituality, very often there's so much stress, anxiety, and tension in the body. So the body-mind is so kind of compressed and compact that if you ask them to experience, or notice the spaciousness, or notice an arising of a contraction in their body, they can't, because everything is contracted. So this is a very important point. If everything is contracted, if everything is tight, then we can't feel, there's no contrast. This is why there's so much emphasis in yoga on stretching things out physically. And again, the body and the mind are ultimately connected. So if you start stretching out the body, releasing the tension from the body, then the mind will likely follow at some point. It may not follow immediately, but there's at least a loosening up of things in there. So they're tied together very much so. So this is the idea in yoga, is begin to create some space. Once there's some space, and especially if you experience awakening, spiritual awakening, then arisings in the chitta, what in yoga is called chitta, the heart mind, begin to become more evident. We begin to notice disturbances that arise in the heart mind. So the heart mind, its natural state is tranquil and peaceful, spacious, and then we can notice when something is arising that is not that. And again, temporary arisings, I think, in my experience, are just a part of life. I think some people have this idea that enlightenment is like this sort of monotone experience of, I'm just blissed out, or I'm peaceful, and there's no sadness, there's no happiness, there's just kind of like a flat line, for emotionally a flat line. I think that would be really boring. And pretty much all of my teachers, that's what they say. That while we can, in meditation and through practices, experience a very sort of steady state, a transcendent state, the way a lot of them phrase it is the juice is in the embodiment. The interesting stuff, the story, the movie is in the embodiment. So if you think of a screen, a movie screen, right? When you're sitting there watching the movie, you could spend the entire time focusing on the edges of the screen and keep reminding yourself that you're watching a movie. But the real juice, the reason why you paid the money to be there, is to actually observe the film, right? Now, I've given the movie analogy before, I think, to you, but this might be a good time to review it. As I've said before, if you are watching a film and you all of a sudden became the character in the film, you may no longer enjoy the film because you're too identified with it. So the example I give is Tom Cruise. He's Mission Impossible. He's hanging on the edge of a cliff by one finger. It's entertaining to watch that, right? If you enjoy that kind of film, but let's just say you do. You enjoy action films, you enjoy Mission Impossible, you like Tom Cruise, he's hanging there on the edge of the cliff. You're feeling some like, oh, what's going to happen to Ethan, right? You're nervous for him. All of a sudden you become him and you're on the edge of the cliff. Now you panic, right? A moment ago there was a pleasant feeling of, ooh, what's going to happen? Now you're panicked because you are identified as the character. Now the opposite of that is, let's say you don't like Mission Impossible. Somebody dragged you to that movie. You don't like Tom Cruise. You don't think the acting is good. You don't think that the characters are believable. Well, the whole time you're there, you're just going to be waiting for the film to be over, right? You're suffering through this film like, oh my God, please. So this is what some people do spiritually. Most of us are identified as the character in the film, and so we're too invested to enjoy the human experience. We're too stressed out. We're hanging on the edge of a cliff. And whether you realize it or not, that's human life. You can have all the money in the world, you can have all the success in the world, you can have all the admiration and fame in the world. You're essentially hanging by a finger on the edge of a cliff. Life is like that. It's a very delicate balance, and it can be thrown off balance at any time. I may not even make it through making this video. That's how delicate life is. Am I going to live with in a constant state of heightened awareness and vigilance because I'm afraid my life is going to be taken? No, I'm not. I'm going to enjoy it. But the fact of the matter is I have no idea when it will end. It could end at any time. The situation can change any time. So most people are too identified with the character in the film. Then what can happen to spiritual people is they get too disidentified. They lose complete interest in the movie. They're just waiting for it to be over, the movie being their life. And again, they start to see everything is meaningless and pointless, and who cares about this, who cares about that, none of it matters. In non-dual circles, people say, there's nobody here, and there's no one to do anything, and all this kind of stuff, which is a type of spiritual bypass. The sweet spot, in my opinion, is to know you're watching a film, right? To know you're safe and you're watching a film, and yet you're invested in the character in the film. That's how you enjoy a film, and it's a very similar experience with embodied living. Once we wake up, we need to stay awake and then be aware of the character who we are playing, you might say, and help them navigate life and enjoy their story as it unfolds, because it's a very rich and powerful experience. Suffering is happens when we are no longer doing that. So again, suffering is like a warning light. And this is why you want to be really honest with yourself whether or not you're suffering, because it's like a warning light. It goes off and it tells us that we aren't actually in right relationship with what's going on in our life. So again, pain, emotion arises in response to a situation. And again, sometimes it's what we could call unpleasant, or it's something we would rather resolve. It's tension, right? Music is, if you listen to music, I'm a musician, so music is tension and release. Tension and release. Okay, music that doesn't have that is not interesting. A life that doesn't have that will not be interesting. It's not why we're embodied as human beings. We will not have an interesting experience if that's the case. Okay, so tension and release, tension and release. But music that is just tension and tension and tension and tension is also not enjoyable. Okay, I could write a piece of music like that to show you. Maybe I should do that sometime. Write a piece of music that's just all no tension, and then a piece of music that's just tension and more tension, and there's no resolution. So this is how many people are living. Tension. They're stressed out. Dukkha, suffering. They're just suffering all the time. They live in chronic suffering. Sure, there are breaks. There are moments where maybe they have a brief moment of happiness. They get a cup of coffee and it's just so good. They eat a steak dinner and yum. And then it's like right back to anxiety and suffering and stress. What I'm hoping to communicate to you is it doesn't have to be this way. It can be different, but it does require you doing the work to unwind the neural pathways and psychosomatic damage that has been done to you. Now, maybe I shouldn't say the word has been done to you. You actually did it to yourself unknowingly with the help of those around you. But the fact of the matter is, it's almost no human being has had a perfect upbringing. And so some people come through very difficult upbringings, seemingly almost unscathed. In fact, they may have been emboldened by having a difficult upbringing and rising to meet that. They may have at a very young age just said, I'm not going to let this defeat me. And I know I'm stronger than this, whatever the challenge is. And this is something that I think is lacking in today's social discourse, is very much so. Some people are trying to paint almost everybody as a victim and, somehow make whole groups of people like they're powerless and like they've been victimized. And I'm not saying the world is fair. I'm not saying there aren't people out there who will try and victimize you, or you've always been treated fairly or equally. Absolutely not. That's not true. But there's a difference psychologically, spiritually, when we say no to someone trying to victimize us or do whatever it is. We take back our power and our strength. So this is really, really important. Now, I was talking about psychological pain and suffering, but what's interesting is modern science is beginning to point to repressed emotions as actually being linked with chronic pain. So we can draw a pretty strong analogy here, if not a one-for-one correlation, that again, if I have my finger and I pinch the end of my finger, I'm going to feel pain in that situation, and that's healthy, right? I'm pinching, I'm cutting off the blood. If I continue doing that, I might damage my finger. So that pain is actually good and healthy. It's telling me that my body is in a situation that is not good for it. I need to get out of that situation. Chronic pain, and again, I can't prove or say that all chronic pain is ultimately psychosomatic, but what's interesting again is the science is beginning to point in that direction, and the teacher I'm currently working with has healed his own chronic pain by, again, dealing with repressed emotions. So he had chronic pain, he was given painkillers, morphine, whatever it is, to deal with the pain. But because he was awake spiritually, he approached it from a spiritual perspective, reluctantly. At first, he just wanted to believe that it was physical. In fact, when his partner suggested that it was psychosomatic, he actually got very angry at his partner, even though he says today, ultimately, his partner was right. So chronic pain, unlike pain in a moment, right? This is a good thing. It's serving a function. It's saying, hey, get out of that situation. we change, we get out of that situation. Chronic pain, if you think about it, if something is off or wrong or whatever it is, it's just ongoing. And a lot of times chronic pain doesn't relate to something physical. Sometimes it does, but some people have chronic pain and the doctor looks for the cause and there's no cause. So again, that sort of points us to at least some chronic pain is caused by psychosomatic, and it is, again, the repressed emotions. That's what we're learning, that not being able to express joy, not being able to express sadness, not being able to act on fear, not being able to express anger. These emotions fester. They don't go away. Their energy, again, the energy needs to flow. And when they are stopped, because again, some of us may have actually been in physical danger if we had expressed. So again, there's a reason why, right? It's not just nonsense. It's not, we weren't being stupid. Usually there was a reason why we repressed what we repressed. Or maybe you just found you got love. If you were a good little boy or girl and you weren't angry and you weren't sad or whatever it is, you got the love of your parents, and that's what we wanted. And so you learned that if you took your emotions and shoved them down, then you could get an ice cream, or you could get a hug, or your parents would say, I love you, or whatever it is. So most of us have had this in one form or another. And what's interesting is even after we wake up spiritually, these repressed emotions may not come to the surface without help. And this is where I am now. I'm working on what's called inquiry. And inquiry for me is the next step after the meditation that I teach you. I highly recommend, if you're not already doing the meditation that I teach, that you start doing that meditation. There is a video you can watch, or you can book a private session with me. I can teach it to you. Or when we start doing retreats again, you can come on a retreat. That's a great way to learn or deepen your meditation practice. So I highly recommend the meditation, but even people who meditate regularly, if there are emotions that are repressed, they may never come into awareness to be healed. They might. And certainly with enough meditation and enough time, it's a lot more likely. But most of us, especially if you're a student of mine, you have a busy modern life. There's only so much time you're going to be able to devote to meditation. So in my experience, meditation can be very good for dealing with your current emotions and stresses and things that come up. Anything that would have been repressed, if you're allowing it to come up as I instruct, then those things will be resolved. But people can have very deeply seated, buried, repressed emotions, traumatic emotions, things like that, that they don't allow themselves to even experience in meditation. And that's where inquiry can be very, very helpful. So pain, suffering. Acute pain, right, in response to a situation. Again, like if I have something going on, I fall, I scrape my knee, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt. And that hurt is going to, again, help me maybe stay off my knee while I need to, help me seek the medical attention I need to heal that knee. But chronic pain very often is in the back. And so just this chronic back pain doesn't go away, doesn't heal. And what's interesting is my teacher, there was actually, when they did scans, they could see the damage there. So the damage remains, but the pain is gone. And so again, this is pointing to maybe the damage was actually the result of that festering emotional repression. It actually manifested physically. Now, will it eventually heal? I don't know. That's an interesting question. Once the pain has healed, will the body actually heal itself? Possibly. As many of you know, I really believe in the power of our bodies to heal themselves. Can everything be healed? I don't know. But I very much believe in the power of the body to heal itself if we can find the right avenue and the right approach. So pain versus suffering, again, dukkha can mean both, but the way that I'm using that word, suffering, dukkha, I'm usually using it to describe that prolonged, I'm depressed, I feel anxious, I'm stressed out, I worry all the time, I'm afraid, those types of things. Now, I just want to very quickly say that both pain and suffering ultimately they're not our enemy. They are indicator lights, if you will, for life. So if I'm living with a lot of fear and I'm letting fear guide me, that's simply telling me I'm moving in the wrong direction. It serves a purpose. So again, you are mishearing me and misunderstanding me if you think I'm encouraging you to repress fear or emotions, to push them out of your awareness. Rather, we want to be aware of when we are letting fear guide us, what decisions we're making based on fear, and we want to begin to investigate. And that's where inner yoga, meditation, inquiry, that's where these very powerful tools help us do that investigative work. So again, if you're a student of mine, you know the yoga postures are very valuable, very useful, but they were never designed to do this deep psychological work that is necessary for us to really heal and be whole and to really enjoy the human life. So, very important question for us to just check in and ask ourselves, am I suffering? Am I enjoying the ride? Am I enjoying this movie? And for me, the answer is yes, and it's been yes for a long time. Are there moments where I'm very much challenged, I'm at my edge, and I'm not sure? Absolutely. And you can watch a talk I gave on the dark night, and there are experiences I have that can be very challenging. I went through one recently. It was very emotionally challenging, and it was a very human moment for me, but ultimately it was a very beautiful moment because I really allowed, again, myself to have that experience. And I was experiencing emotions and things that I had not before, and that brought me to a very good realization and a good place ultimately. So this is my approach, is I tend to not fight with myself at this point. I really trust my experience, myself. I trust my humanity even, and I really embrace my humanity. And this is maybe one of the big differences between the modern type of spirituality that I'm trying to teach you versus maybe some of the older traditions. Now, again, if we had some of those teachers here, then we might find that the way their teachings are interpreted are simply misunderstandings. And I suspect that this is sometimes the case. But there also tends to be, just like technology evolves, right? We have smartphones now, we have laptops. We didn't when I was growing up. Technology advances. What I teach you is spiritual technology. That's all it really is. And even though there were cultures in the past that developed really, you could say, high-tech spiritual tools, it doesn't mean they can't be refined and improved. Almost just the course of technology is almost always to become more refined and improved over time. So this, in my view, is what's happening with spirituality, with the teachers that I study with, and hopefully, if you're studying with me, what I share with you. What I'm sharing with you is not a copy and paste from an old tradition. Not that there's anything wrong with that if that's working for you. But what I see is, again, I'm in contact with many people, many seekers, many people who've been trying to heal or to become enlightened for decades. And I hear a lot of this. I've been meditating for decades. I've been following this guru for decades, and something was missing. And they didn't address these repressed emotions. They didn't address my childhood trauma. They didn't address my increasing insomnia, sleeplessness. They report very much what I experienced when I was simply following just the Zen tradition, which was keep going, keep meditating. You know, sort of this, in yoga we have a pretty famous teacher who's famous for saying, keep practicing and all will come. Just keep practicing, right? That's the answer for everything. Just keep practicing. Don't worry. Everything will come. All the answers will come. And in my experience, this is really bad advice. So this is, again, why I'll once again encourage you, reach out. If you are struggling with something, reach out. This is one of the big things of having a teacher. And even if my advice might be, well, I think you just need to keep practicing and things will settle down. If that doesn't work, then you come back. I doubt that that would be my response, but you never know, because sometimes that is what people need to hear. My, again, sort of problem with that as a general advice is it shouldn't be general. Okay, we do need to practice, and we need to practice diligently and over a long period of time. But what practice? For how long? How often? And what happens when we hit a bump in the road and we reach a dark night of the soul, or the practice no longer seems to be bearing fruit? Many people experience this in spirituality, and they experience a lot of frustration and anger, and they end up giving up on healing. They end up giving up on spirituality. And I'm hoping that I can help you avoid that. So once again, everyone, I love you very much. Thank you to my patrons on Patreon. You really do work with me. You're the ones that make this possible, this content possible. I wouldn't be able to do it without you. And if you're on YouTube, thank you for watching all the way through. Please give me a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed already, please do. Leave a comment, leave a question if you have one. And if you would like to join the Patreon community, become a patron. Check out the links, and it starts at just $1. It is donation based, so all the content there is ultimately free, but I do post content there that I don't post on YouTube right now, so please check it out. All right, everyone, thank you for listening, and until next time, namaste, and have a great day.